January was packed with great science fiction and horror novels, but since I lean so heavily into these genres, I'm thinking of mixing in some fantasy for February. I have an idea of what I want to read, but nothing is set in stone just yet. So for now, I've got some fascinating books to talk about. Some were fantastic, some caught me off guard, and some made me seriously rethink my life choices. That said, let's dive into everything I read in January. Late last year, I decided I was going to revisit the Murrid Aldrin series, starting with When Gravity Fails. A Fire in the Sun picks up a couple of months after the first book, and stepping back into the Boudin felt like reuniting with an old friend. Murrid Aldrin, the once defiant independent operator, is now exactly what he swore he'd never be. Owned, augmented, and increasingly dependent on the Mahdi's he plugs into his brain. One minute he's Buck Rogers, the next he's some hard-boiled detective from a pulp novel. It's a wild concept, but Effinger handles it masterfully. He does a great job blending noir sensibilities with cyberpunk grit in a setting that feels both futuristic and yet somehow grounded. Murrid is still technically a cop, and this time he does have a partner, but his dependence on Mahdi's makes him unreliable and leads to some interesting plot lines. Meanwhile, there's a killer running around, he's harvesting organs, and someone's out to assassinate the most powerful man in the country. Yeah, it's kind of a wild plot. The series is a must-read for fans of noir, but with a cyberpunk edge. And if you're hesitant about the sci-fi elements, don't be. The futuristic setting just enhances the hard-boiled detective tropes rather than overshadowing them. I'm hoping that in Book 3, Murrid finally stops living through borrowed identities and rediscovers who he actually is. Because at the end of the day, we all have to find the version of ourselves that we like best. Alright, let's talk about Alien Phalanx. If you're like me and have become a little disillusioned with the Alien franchise, you know exactly why. Most new entries, whether it's a book, a game, or a movie, follow the same tired formula. A group of characters set out on a mission, the xenomorph shows up and derails everything, characters get picked off one by one until only one survivor remains. Wash, rinse, repeat for over 40 years. And look, that structure works. I loved Alien Romulus, but when you've seen it play out dozens of times, it starts to feel like a rerun. That's why Phalanx is such a breath of fresh air. Scott Sigler throws out the usual formula and delivers something completely distinct. Something that still respects the franchise's core DNA, but isn't afraid to take risks. First off, it's just fun. Sigler knows exactly what makes the xenomorph terrifying and leans into it. But beyond that, the book injects new energy into the series by playing with different themes and storytelling elements. It's proof that you don't have to rehash the same survival horror blueprint that made an Alien story compelling in the first place. This is what franchise storytelling should look like. Studio execs, game developers, novelists, y'all need to take note. This is how you keep a long-running series alive and relevant. Last year, I reread Parable of the Sower, and I was blown away all over again. Butler's writing hits with a clarity and urgency that feels almost too real. Especially given the current state of just, everything. Parable of the Talents takes that foundation and builds something even more devastating. The world Butler crafts is on the brink of collapse, torn apart by an apocalypse, religious extremism, and systemic cruelty. And at the center of it all is Lauren Olamina, the founder of Earthseed. She's a survivor and a revolutionary. Her vision for a better future is constantly under siege, particularly by Andrew Steele Jarrett, a populist preacher turned president whose Christian America movement is equal parts fascist and, given the state of American politics at this moment, terrifyingly plausible. There's a common belief that religion has caused more wars than anything else, but I've always had the sense that it's just way too simplistic. The real motivators are usually land, power, and money. Religion is just a convenient mask for deeper ambitions. And Butler nails that concept here. Jarrett's Crusaders, they aren't just true believers, they're pawns in a much larger power struggle. And Butler doesn't just critique religious extremism, she offers an alternative in Earthseed, a belief system based on adaptability and survival. Lauren's vision isn't just about blind faith, it's about facing the reality of an uncertain universe. And what makes this book so powerful is how it forces us to examine the systems we take for granted. How easily could something like this happen? How much of it is already happening? It's a brutal, painful read, but also an essential one. 2024 marked 50 years since Carrie was first published, and somehow I never actually read it. I've had this big ass edition of King's first three novels sitting on my shelf since like 2002. I'd convinced myself that seeing the 1976 film was enough, so I never felt like I never felt like I had to read the book. But yeah, that was a mistake. Reading Carrie is a completely different experience. It's more intimate, more unsettling, and somehow even darker than the movie. The way King layers in fake newspaper clippings and scientific reports and eyewitness accounts makes his story feel almost too real, like an event we're analyzing after the fact rather than a piece of fiction. Carrie White is bullied relentlessly at school and abused at home, at least until she develops telekinetic powers. One humiliating prank at prom pushes her way over the edge, and she unleashes absolute destruction on like a biblical level. But what makes this book so timeless is how it forces us to examine cruelty, complicity, and power even 50 years later. Carrie isn't just a horror story, it's a tragedy. And King masterfully blurs the line between victim and monster. You understand why she snaps, even as you recoil from the destruction she causes. It's a real gut punch of a novel, and honestly, I regret waiting so long to read it. And let's just say, this book made me think about my own high school years. I never bullied anyone, but I also never stopped it when I saw it happening. That complicity, the silence of the bystander, it's something that King captures brilliantly. And it's why Carrie still resonates today. So that was my January wrap up. A mix of science fiction, horror, and dystopian fiction. So, exactly my kind of reading month. Now I want to hear from you. Have you read any of these books? What were your thoughts? And what did you read in January? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs a book recommendation, and definitely subscribe because every subscriber brings me one step closer to galactic domination. Until next time, take care, keep reading, and I'll see you in the next one.